conferences, edited books, and also he has supervised mentors, 40 PhD scholars, and 23 is awarded and 17 is ongoing. He is also the recipient of the Distinguished Alumni Award from the Manipal University in 2011. So ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Professor P. Balachandra, the chair of this session, and the entire panelists. So without much ado, Professor Balachandra, it's all yours, sir.
Yeah. Good morning to all of you. As I was telling people, I am not a coffee expert, a coffee lover. Though, I have dealt with, various aspects of sustainability, from its three pillars, economic, social, and environmental, since many years. My life used to be very good, when I started teaching sustainability way back in 1998, because hardly anyone knew about the term sustainability. I used to start from introductions, explaining the concepts, but over a period of time, everyone started becoming aware of the term, and it has become more like a fashion nowadays. People have different perceptions, different interpretations, but the challenges have become more. For me, I have to introduce sustainability from a different perspective. When you bring coffee into the context, it has impact from both sides. It has some impact on climate change and sustainability. It is also impacted by climate change. I think the climate change impact on coffee, I at least believe that it is more significant than its impact on climate change. As a sustainability preacher, I always, start my classes, by giving introduction with respect to conflict between consumption and production and its implications for sustainability. Any other commodity, it could be food, fuel, anything. Human greed, results in a significant increase in consumption. More the consumption, you will have more negative impacts. On the other hand, the economic systems, it could be government, industries, they want more production. So that there will be more consumption, there will be economic growth, growth in profits. I think this is a conflict. The climate change or sustainability requires everyone to reduce consumption, whereas economic objectives requires more consumption and more growth. How do we solve? Again, the distinction between, whatever my colloquial understanding, consumption is an outcome of greed, but coffee is exception. Its consumption is because of love of coffee. I think, and there is no end to that. You can have a cup of coffee a day or 10 cups of a coffee. Unlike, there is a feeling of satisfaction or accomplishment there, any number of coffee. So this is a very, very significant challenge for the whole value chain of coffee. How we reduce the carbon footprints of coffee in terms of its whole value chain, as well as, enhance its productivity, growth, consumption, because it is loved by everyone, without impacting the climate change at large, as well as getting impacted by climate change at large. I will not take much time, giving these general introductions, but there are, very, very specialized technical talks on discussing about various aspects of coffee in its all forms, its different stages of value chain. I will start, introducing the speakers and allow them to speak. And also I would like to thank the organizers of this excellent conference, for giving me this opportunity. And I think we can start now. Just 1 minute. Yeah, let us start with the first. The first presentation of the day. Now the topic is on climate change and its impact on various sections of coffee value chain. It is a very, very important talk, and it will be given by Miss Reina Lang. And Reina Lang, she is a Senior Director, Sustainable Coffee Conservation International. As I said, she works at the Conservation International as the Senior Director of Sustainable Coffee. It's a leading organization, with respect to global coffee program. And she is tasked with building and overseeing partnerships in the coffee sector with a focus on achieving coffee industry's long-term goal of making coffee the first sustainably produced agricultural product as part of the Sustainable Coffee Challenge. I think it is a very, very interesting aspect. With over 15 years in the sector, including a decade of field-based experience in Central America, Mexico, and the Caribbean, Reina has worked with agricultural value chain programs focused on supplier growth and sustainability in coffee and cocoa in the International Finance Corporation. Additionally, she supported small and medium enterprise development as a Peace Corps volunteer in Nicaragua. I welcome Ms. Reina Lang.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you to the event organizers for having me here. It's a pleasure to be on this panel with such distinguished colleagues. So my name is Reina Lang, and I lead our coffee program at Conservation International. Conservation International is a global environmental not-for-profit that works to protect nature for people. We have offices in 29 countries, but projects in over 100, and we work closely with over 2,000 global partners. So in coffee, we work at several different levels, direct with farming communities to promote protection alongside sustainable production, with corporate partners to embed science-based decision-making in their sustainability strategies, and then also at the sector level through the Sustainable Coffee Challenge to unlock ambitious commitments that drive scale at origin. So why am I up here today talking about climate change? In the lead up to the UN Climate Change Convention, COP28, later this year, the United Nations just released a sobering report about the world's progress in the fight against climate change. Regrettably, the world is falling short of the necessary actions required to halt the climate crisis. Climate change threatens people's lives and livelihoods and the integrity of ecosystems around the world. But we know that nature can help protect and shield us from climate change impacts. Furthermore, we know that land plays a key role in the climate system as an essential carbon sink because its surfaces, such as forest, regulate the planet's temperature and help to store carbon. But our land is under threat from pressures from deforestation, from urbanization, from agricultural expansion, and from unsustainable farming practices. Reductions in CO2, or carbon dioxide emissions, are seen as a key element in abating climate change. On the screen is a graphic from the Exponential Roadmap on Natural Climate Solutions, which Conservation International published last year and serves as a high-level guide to ensure nature meets the necessary carbon storage potential while supporting biodiversity and food security. The report notes that we must rapidly transition global land use to have the potential to meet the Paris Climate Agreement. This graphic shows that in terms of potential reductions, zero deforestation supply chains, so forest protection, and climate smart farming, or improved management, are important ways to reach that lofty goal. And that's where coffee can come in. While we see that there's increasing measures to mitigate climate change from government, we've been talking a lot this week about the EUDR and some of the policies that the European government have put in place in their effort to mitigate climate change. We've seen industry and even consumers take action on climate, but there's still more to be done. With the world on track to break the record for the hottest year in history, a 1.5 degree Celsius increase in the tropics is a near-term reality. And what does this mean for coffee production? We know that we will likely see an increase in pest and disease outbreaks. Ecosystem services, including pollinators, will be reduced. Water scarcity will impact production and processing, as well as access for communities. And we'll see a decrease, of course, in yield and quality, and ultimately economic stability for farmers. And overall, we'll see change in suitable area for coffee production. That change in suitable area will impact how and where coffee is grown. Higher temperatures could cause lower elevations to become less apt for coffee production, while areas at higher altitudes open up. And across the globe, many countries have those higher areas that will become suitable for coffee production that are currently considered forests. This could indicate a future risk for deforestation as coffee production shifts and directly competes with forests. And those shifts in coffee growing could also lead to unemployment in the areas that become less suitable, and furthermore, loss of cultivation knowledge as areas move. So taking the model data from the Center for Tropical Agriculture, CIAT, their suitability analysis that they did a few years ago, this map displays the net change in suitable hectares in each country between 2010 and 2050 in a percentage. So here you can see that suitable land for Arabica production will reduce in most producing countries around the globe. The darker colored countries on the screen are those that will have a larger net change. Here in Karnataka alone, it's estimated that over 950,000 hectares will lose suitability, will become less apt for coffee production, which actually represents a 90% reduction. Robusta won't be spared, and we'll see impacts across Brazil, Uganda, Vietnam, among other places. I won't, for the purpose of time, I won't go into details here, but if you would like to learn more about some of these visualizations, you can check out the Resilience Coffee Atlas through conservation.org. And you can see details on suitability. You can see that coffee mapped across biodiversity richness areas and areas that are also of important carbon storage. So I know that that picture that I just painted looks very grim. And you know, it does look quite catastrophic for coffee, but there will be enough area to produce coffee into the future. However, trade-offs will need to be made. Those trade-offs include decisions on where the world sources coffee and at whose expense. If action isn't taken now, these impacts could lead to consolidation of supply in countries of lower vulnerability. Beyond just an increase in coffee sourcing disruptions, risks and costs are likely to be elevated in vulnerable countries, where climate could catalyze political and economic unrest, exacerbate social tensions, and degrade security environments. Here's just a depiction of some of the impacts that will be felt across the supply chain. We will see increased stress and decline in economic capacity of institutions to support their populations in adapting to climate impacts. At the community level, we'll see that competition for land and pressures on forests and even other crops that are vital for food safety and the economy. Potentially displaced communities and labor shortages. The trade will likely see logistical challenges from extreme weather events, damage to physical assets, and new costs to replace productive investments, infrastructures as coffee areas shift. Ultimately, this will lead to inconsistent supply and competition for volumes and quality of coffee. And for the consumer, they will have a reduction in coffee flavors and origin diversity options. So the challenges at Origin are big, and there's need to tackle the issues from various angles. Here are a few things that can be done at the industry, farm, and government level to promote adaptation and mitigation efforts. I won't go into all the points, and I know there are a lot of them up there, and hopefully you can read them. Several of these things, some of my fellow panelists will also be speaking to. But we do encourage coffee companies to stay in the places that are vulnerable to climate impacts, engage in landscape approaches to address some of those climate challenges together beyond just their supply chain. Fund on-the-ground adaptation measures, provide incentives for adaptation. I think that's an important piece of any engagement strategy from the private sector. At the farm level, as several of the panelists will talk to about climate resilient varietals, I think that that's a very key element to help those farms and maybe even in some of the areas that will lose suitability to adapt and continue to produce. And then, of course, at the government level, developing policies that incentivize low carbon farming and conservation, and increasing collaboration with the private sector to help try and scale some of those impacts collectively. So I'll leave you just with one example of how we see adaptation and mitigation efforts can align at Origin. So this is a map of Colombia. And Colombia has a national determined contribution to cut emissions and adapt to climate. In 2021, they revised their NDC and set out a plan to reduce emissions by 50% by 2030 and become carbon neutral by 2050 as a country. And this part of their plan includes heavy investments in adaptation actions in agricultural, forestry, and other land use. The sector in Colombia, the private sector and public actors, came together to sign in 2021 a coffee, forest, and climate agreement that aims to promote adaptation, mitigation, and resilience of coffee communities, and in addition to promoting sustainable intensification on coffee farms. The middle picture is the largest producing department in Colombia, Huila. Conservation International and many partners from organizations in this room are working closely in Huila with local authorities to promote territorial sustainability at the landscape, improving forest connectivity, protecting environmentally strategic areas, and also improving productive capacity. These investments and this alignment helps us drive funding and hopefully potentially scale efforts at the farm level, where some of those practices that I mentioned on the previous slide are critical to help farmers adapt. So with that, I will hand over to our next panelist. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Reina Lang, for that excellent presentation. Next, I will invite Mr. Salvador Urrutia Lausel from Lang. He is from World Coffee Research. He is working as Latin America Director at World Coffee Research since 2016. He provides guidance to World Coffee Research global program portfolio, and he leads public-private partnerships in the region. With 41 years career, he has devoted nearly 3 decades to empowering the coffee sector and its producer community. From 1999 to 2004, he held the position of Minister of Agriculture in El Salvador. And prior to that, he was the General Director of El Salvador's Research Coffee Institution, along with other high-level positions in both the public and private sectors. And he was born in 1958 and resides in El Salvador and earned his degree in agricultural engineering with a specialization in economics and a made degree, I believe. Yeah. Okay, from the UCA of El Salvador. I hand over the mic to Mr. Salvador. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Buenos días a todos y un agradecimiento muy especial a los organizadores de esta quinta Conferencia Mundial del Café 2023. Confiamos el qué a los científicos, mientras que nuestra comunidad necesita innovar en cómo establecer un nuevo marco que aborde las complejidades a las que se enfrentan las naciones productoras de café para mantener la sostenibilidad del cultivo. Todos comprendemos que las exportaciones de café son competitivas entre los países productores, aunque los desafíos que enfrenta el café son compartidos por todos. Se requieren enfoques novedosos que resuenen con las realidades del entorno competitivo del café, al tiempo que aprovechen el potencial de la colaboración. Existe una gran urgencia de innovación en la agricultura del café, a medida que los agricultores enfrentan la crisis climática y buscamos hacer transición de la agricultura del café hacia sistemas cada vez más sostenibles desde el punto de vista ambiental y económico. El cambio climático es una crisis aquí y ahora. Las consecuencias ya visibles de estos desafíos son de gran alcance. Las fallas en los cultivos están impactando directamente en la seguridad alimentaria, mientras que los costos en aumento están ejerciendo una presión insostenible sobre los agricultores. Simultáneamente, la presión y las interrupciones en el suministro están generando incertidumbre en el mercado. Las repercusiones de estos factores interconectados se vuelven cada vez más evidentes. Con cada cosecha que se afecta, los agricultores se enfrentan a costos crecientes que socavan aún más su resiliencia financiera. El efecto dominó continúa a medida que las interrupciones en el suministro repercuten en el mercado, agravando una situación ya precaria. Al evaluar este panorama, los imperativos de prácticas agrícolas sostenibles y resilientes nunca han sido tan urgentes. La innovación es importante. Sin embargo, es preocupante que la mayoría de los agricultores de café todavía estén gestionando sus negocios con tecnologías que no han visto actualizaciones significativas entre los 50 y los 100 años. La combinación de variedades mejoradas con buenas prácticas de gestión agrícola mejorará los rendimientos y contrarrestará directamente la conversión de uso de tierras y la deforestación que contribuyen a la degradación ambiental. Además, la reducción en el uso de los agroquímicos debido a la tolerancia de enfermedades y plagas conduce a una disminución de emisiones de gases de efecto de invernadero en línea con los esfuerzos globales para mitigar el cambio climático. A través de la sinergia de estos avances, el cultivo del café puede allanar el camino hacia un futuro más sostenible y económicamente viable. Usando técnicas modernas de mejoramiento, podemos acelerar el proceso para aumentar la frecuencia de rasgos favorables con el tiempo. Seleccionamos a los individuos más destacados en términos de rendimiento, calidad del producto y resistencia a calores y la sequía, y luego lo recombinamos a través de la polinización cruzada, un método utilizado por los polinizadores durante cientos de años. Esta combinación de selección y recombinación se repite en ciclos sucesivos, permitiendo que las características deseables se consoliden eficazmente dentro de la población, tales como mejoras en el rendimiento, en la calidad de la taza y la tolerancia al calor y la sequía, se alcanzan a través de este método sistemático. Pero el problema no proviene de aspectos técnicos, sino más bien de aspectos estructurales. Ha habido una inversión insuficiente para abordar los desafíos apremiantes que enfrenta la industria del café. Actualmente, el sector cafetalero global destina apenas 115 millones de dólares al año para impulsar la innovación agrícola. Esta cantidad queda lamentablemente corta ante la inminente crisis. En colaboración con la distinguida economista, la doctora Maywish Maredia, de la Universidad Estatal de Michigan, hemos calculado minuciosamente la magnitud financiera de esta crisis y la inversión necesaria en investigación y desarrollo para evitarla. Este cálculo considera la suposición de que el consumo del café se mantendrá en tasas de crecimiento históricas, junto con el impacto innegable del cambio climático en los rendimientos. Si deseamos seguir obteniendo café más allá de la frontera de Brasil y Vietnam, nos vemos obligados a invertir significativamente más, alrededor de 452 millones de dólares adicionales al año. En total, para mantener la productividad y la competitividad de muchos países productores, se necesita una inversión de 567 millones de dólares anuales para generar innovaciones en las fincas. Esto no es un esfuerzo singular exclusivo para aquellos presentes en esta sala. Es un esfuerzo colectivo que abarca a los gobiernos de los países productores y consumidores, los agricultores, los tostadores y los interesados en todos los niveles. Este nosotros colectivo puede hacer que este cambio sea factible. En este momento, el World Coffee Research está trabajando diligentemente para involucrar a los gobiernos de todo el mundo, fomentando una comprensión de esta urgencia. Nuestra participación colectiva en la industria también puede desbloquear fondos privados y públicos adicionales, reduciendo esta brecha de inversión. En el contexto del avance global, hay una verdad universal que resalta: para que los países, variedades e innovaciones puedan contribuir a la competitividad de la industria del café, deben ser competitivos por sí mismos, y cada país se enfrenta a desafíos específicos, lo que genera una paradoja. Mientras se esfuerza cada país en abordar sus problemas de manera individual, estos países, sin querer, renuncian a los beneficios de la colaboración científica. La búsqueda de soluciones en solitario puede, sin querer, oscurecer el panorama del progreso compartido. Para responder a la crisis climática, necesitamos construir un sistema más sólido, una red para la innovación, una que pueda resistir los desafíos y las demandas de nuestro mundo en constante cambio. No es suficiente centrarse únicamente en los resultados de la innovación. También debemos imaginar y fomentar todos los insumos necesarios. La colaboración es clave, ya que reúne perspectivas y expectativas diversas, fomentando el intercambio de ideas esenciales para abordar problemas complejos. Las instituciones sólidas, como los Institutos Nacionales de Café, son un componente clave de la red, ofreciendo marcos que fomentan la experimentación, protegen la propiedad intelectual y facilitan la cooperación. Sin embargo, nuestro plan no debería detenerse ahí. Los marcos de políticas, la educación, el acceso a datos abiertos y la participación pública actúan como pilares adicionales para respaldar la innovación. La innovación implica explorar nuevos territorios, probar cosas nuevas, y estamos conscientes que habrá frustración, fracasos y resultados inesperados, y todo esto lleva tiempo. Y dada la velocidad del cambio que tenemos ante nosotros, debemos pensar en cómo podemos acelerar nuestro progreso en la innovación. En el caso de una variedad bien conocida, como el catuahí, pasaron 50 años desde la primera polinización hasta que estuvo ampliamente disponible en manos de los agricultores de todo el mundo. A medida que miramos hacia el futuro del café, trabajar juntos de manera colaborativa ofrecerá la oportunidad de encontrar formas de acelerar los plazos de innovación para que no tengamos que esperar otros 50 años para la próxima variedad o innovación en la producción. Para lograr este ambicioso objetivo, el World Coffee Research ha concebido la Global Coffee Breeding Network, Innovea, una red mundial de colaboradores que trabajan juntos en varios países para mejorar los avances genéticos en el fitomejoramiento del café. A través de una sinergia única conocida como la coopetición, que combina la cooperación y la competencia, se impulsa un enfoque que no solo fomenta la colaboración entre los participantes, sino que también utiliza la competencia para catalizar el progreso aún más notable en la investigación y el perfeccionamiento del café. El sistema de competición nos permite asociarnos y colaborar con países y empresas que de lo contrario competirían ferozmente. La forma en que estamos organizando este importante trabajo de innovación es diferente en todo lo que ha ocurrido antes en el mundo del café. Es un enfoque ágil, flexible y que maximiza el uso de los recursos escasos y responde a las complejas realidades del café. Con una infusión de nueva diversidad genética, Innovea proporciona un estímulo a los esfuerzos de mejora del café, enriqueciendo el pool genético del cual surgirán variedades futuras. A través de esta extensa red, Innovea aumenta la tasa de la ganancia genética, incrementa el acceso al germoplasma mejorado, moderniza el fitomejoramiento del café a través de tecnologías y métodos de apoyo y fortalece la capacidad de los científicos nacionales y sus técnicas. Finalmente, es una solicitud formal que hago desde este podium a los presentes. Si tienen negocios en regiones o países donde el consumo de café genera importantes o significativas contribuciones a las economías, movilizar la inversión en ciencia agrícola a través de la promoción estratégica es crucial para impulsar un aumento en la financiación de la investigación y el desarrollo por parte de los gobiernos donantes. Al abordar la brecha significativa de 452 millones de dólares al año en la industria del café, se pueden lograr inversiones compartidas en niveles óptimos. Este enfoque no solo respalda la sostenibilidad financiera de la agricultura del café, sino que también promueve la diversidad de origen y capacita a los agricultores para prosperar. En conclusión, nuestro camino hacia adelante no está únicamente definido por los obstáculos tecnológicos, abarca una complejidad más profunda. Esto no es solo un problema técnico que enfrentamos, sino más bien una confluencia de desafíos sistémicos e institucionales que exigen nuestra ingeniosidad colectiva y cooperación para superarlos. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Impact of voluntary sustainability standards. Sorry. Yeah, I repeat, the impact of voluntary sustainability standards or eco-labeling on sustainability of coffee sector. And this would be presented by Dr. Madhuri Nanda, Director, South Asia Rainforest Alliance. Dr. Nanda is an environmental and sustainability professional working for last 2 decades in diverse fields, including climate change, sustainable agriculture, natural resource management, policy analysis, sustainability reporting, auditing, management systems, certification, compliances, environmental impact assessment studies. I think almost like my experience. Yeah. She has worked on environmental and social issues in diverse geographies, including South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Germany, which enriches her exposure to domestic and international business culture. Dr. Nanda also brings her experience in initiating and supporting multi-stakeholder platforms for promoting sustainability agenda. Yeah, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Am I audible? Yes, thank you. First of all, good morning, everyone. I hope you all had your cup of coffee and are alert and active to listen to the panel, the remaining presentations in the panel. I really would like to thank the organizers for bringing me here. It's a privilege to be present in this conference among this august panel speakers to share our experiences on coffee sector through the voluntary sustainability standards. I am Madhuri Nanda. I'm the Director for South Asia. I look after India and Sri Lanka operations for Rainforest Alliance, which I think would not need an introduction, so I will not spend a lot of time talking about Rainforest Alliance, as most of you might already be aware of us. But today I will be talking about our vision for 2030. I'm very grateful to the previous panelists who already spoke about the emerging challenges, and we believe that a bigger vision for 2030 is needed for different stakeholders, and I would like to quickly share that vision with you all here today. And of course, talk about how the voluntary sustainability standards have contributed to sustainable coffee in India and globally. I would also like to touch upon quickly on the challenges and the positive impacts from the certification programs, and also quickly take the landscape level approaches in addition to the farm level interventions which are needed to address the pressing global challenges that we've been talking about. And I would conclude with a regenerative agriculture approach to sustainable coffee farming, which is the central theme of this conference that we all are participating in today. Well, we all are aware that about various challenges that are pressing today's agriculture sector. We have about 4.2 million hectares of primary tropical forests which have been lost. About 25% of the global emissions are caused by agriculture sector, forestry, land use, and 4 out of 5 people in the extreme poverty are living in rural places. Now this really places the context on why it is really important for us to collectivize ourselves, our initiatives, and look at how we can bring a sustainable agriculture sector. And today we are talking here about coffee. We are at a turning point, and that's the reason why our vision for 2030 is looking to speed and scale the impacts. Because we have already seen the impacts of climate change. We have seen that the current efforts are not enough, and we need more resources, even financial resources, to put in the research, as Salvador just mentioned. So in order to bridge all of these gaps, we need to act at a scale and at a speed so that we are able to manage these things. In terms of voluntary standards, coming to the major topic, we have third-party assurance programs. You might be aware in 2018, Rainforest Alliance and UTS merged together. So we also have Fair Trade, Organic, Certificate, Certifica Minas, and Starbucks Cafe practices. And we also have a growing portfolio of second-party or the company standards, which are providing a level of assurance to the buyers and the consumers, and providing a support to the producers to be able to provide a transparent approach to sustainable farming. Coming to our Rainforest Alliance standard, 20% of the global production is RA certified. In the graph here, you can see Brazil is contributing maximum to the certified volumes. The yellow graphs, the yellow part of the graphs shows Arabica, and brown is Robusta. And we have Colombia, Vietnam, Honduras in that ratio of how they are contributing to the certified volumes of coffee. The global sale of Rainforest Alliance certified coffee has decreased by 14% in 2022. But in the Asia Pacific region, we see about 22% increase in the producer sales. About something that I really would like to highlight and flag from this slide today here is that about 40% of the certified coffee is still being sold as conventional. What does that mean? That means for the producers who are actually producing the entire 100% as certified coffee are unable to sell it in the market and gain that kind of premium for the efforts that they have made in their sustainable production. And that is to an extent because of the lack of larger markets access. And I'll come to this challenge again in my next slides. But how do we bridge that gap? And to bridge that gap to a certain extent, we need to raise the level of awareness on more of these sustainable standards among the consumers. At Rainforest Alliance, we did this survey on the brand awareness and brand love. And we see in US, UK, Germany, and Netherlands, how much are the consumers aware about the Rainforest Alliance seal, as an example. And we try to analyze how much are they willing to pay more for sustainable coffee or a sustainable tea or any sustainable commodity. And we see that in US, for example, 49% of the consumers are willing to pay more. We have not done this kind of survey in India, but we do want to do this kind of survey going forward. And we would also like to see how we can raise that level of awareness among the consumers so that domestically as well, the market access to the producers can be increased. And we have increasingly seen this demand coming from the producers, that how can we help them market their coffee, market their tea, market their sustainably produced commodities in the domestic market as well. Coming back to the sustainability challenges, from our certification program, we basically see there are some of these are some of the challenges, including the pest management. The higher incidence of pests and diseases in the coffee sector is impacting the productivity and hence the business of the producers. We are also seeing waste management as one of the key challenges, deforestation and conversion. lack of effective grievance mechanism. There are a lot of social issues also where we see that they are still present, and how voluntary standards can contribute to the addressing of social issues. In terms of our new standard, we have an approach of assess and address. Earlier, we had more of a pass-fail approach, where if you have, for example, a child labor employed, you are not qualified as a certified member of a certification program. But now, we are looking at an assess and address approach, where we find that there are social issues, and they cannot be addressed in one go. So how do you assess those issues and address them jointly to see a plan, a mitigation plan, a remediation plan, to see how you can help the producers to overcome these social risks in their, for the supply chain actors in their supply chains, and for producers in their farms. We also see other issues like wages and contracts, living wage, gender equality, and health and safety. I just spoke about the lack of access of sustainable coffee to the larger markets, which is playing a major role in the challenges for the producers to be able to sell their sustainable coffee, and how we can work on it together. I mean, Rainforest Alliance as an organization has the privilege of working with the producers and also with the supply chain actors. And we are trying to bring them together to see how we can leverage the relationships across the two parts of the supply chain and the value chain to work towards sustainable coffee. Just to give an example, we have shared responsibility as a concept, which has been launched again as part of our 2020 standard, where we are trying to see how the supply chain actors can take the responsibility of sharing the responsibility of sustainable production costs, which the producers are currently incurring. Unless this shared responsibility is taken, the producers will continue to face the challenges. We also see different human interventions like infrastructure development, and a lot of people in Karnataka especially would be able to identify with this challenge, where a lot of land degradation issues are emerging because of the infrastructure development, which are impacting the whole ecosystem of coffee. There are certain positive impacts, of course. We don't just want to talk about the challenges. From the sustainability standards, we see better farm management and control is emerging. With better IPM practices, low input costs are supporting the producers. Premiums and rewards, as more recognition is possible. We see quality improvement. Biodiversity is being enhanced, especially in Karnataka. If we look at coffee growing where there are a lot of elephants and the human-wildlife conflicts are emerging, we see how we can try through these sustainability standards. It's a requirement for them to understand and bridge that relationship between the biodiversity and the humans. Water conservation, creating a lot of riparian buffers within the farms, is one of the requirements of the standards. Better awareness on social issues across the farmers and as well as the top management. And the evidence-based documentation. These are some of the impacts, positive impacts, which the sustainability standards have been able to create in key commodities. And I already spoke about the assess and address approach on social issues, but also we would like to talk about quickly on the continuous improvement which is coming through the smart meters as part of our new standard. There are deforestation risk maps which the producers need to develop as part of the new standard, which also helps them understand where are those risks and now how can you help mitigate those risks. The scale of interventions for mitigating these challenges, overcoming these challenges, are at 2 levels. For the certification program, mostly it's at farm level. But we also see, in order to overcome the larger issues of ecosystem approach, we need a landscape level intervention. These are able to address issues like land degradation, biodiversity conservation on farm as well as off farm areas. It also helps mobilize greater investment for the overall ecological improvement, and hence it's important to look at how can we bring in the farm level as well as the landscape level interventions to bring the greater change. I would just like to mention about one of our projects which we are working at a landscape level, just as an example, along with UNEP as an implementation agency, United Nations Environment Program, which is funded by Global Environment Facility, GEF. It's a 5-year project where we are looking at AP and Karnataka region to address the issues of land degradation and biodiversity conservation. Of course, in Karnataka, the major, the priority of the project is on coffee, and sustainability standards becomes one of the tools on how we can overcome these challenges. As a last point, I would like to quickly mention on the regenerative agriculture aspect. As part of a new strategy, Rainforest Alliance is looking at regenerative agriculture as the core mechanism of taking our approach towards sustainability forward in agriculture. Our standard has been, our certification program has been looking at regenerative approaches for the last 35 years already. But now our focus is primarily on farm and forest biodiversity, primarily agroforestry, looking at water conservation, climate change, adaptation, resilience, and mitigation through climate-smart agriculture, improving soil health through pesticide use reduction, and improving productivity and livelihoods. With these, we are looking at regenerative agriculture approaches. And just as an example, a coffee scorecard was developed jointly with Nespresso, in which we developed jointly with different stakeholders in the sector of coffee to see what are the key parameters around environment and social, which could be measured, monitored over a period of time to qualify different producers in the range of, to categorize them into gold, silver, and bronze category, so that the supply chain actors like Nespresso can look at their supply chains and see how they can target their producers to move from the category of bronze to silver and silver to gold. And it's a sustainability journey, which is something this kind of scorecard can help the supply chain actors to work jointly with their producers. This is my last slide. And I would like to just mention what my previous panelists also spoke about, a joint effort that is needed for us to work with different stakeholders in order to bring a transformation in the coffee sector towards sustainability and managing this pressing challenge of climate change going forward. And I hope that the SDG goals that we have been looking at for stakeholder engagements is able to provide that kind of impact that we are able to move forward. With that, I thank you very much for your patience. And for any questions, please feel free to connect with me, and I'm also going to be around in this conference. Don't forget to drop in at our booth at the conference and also at the Growers Conclave tomorrow, where we would be taking a deep dive into the coffee scorecard and the regenerative agriculture approach that I just mentioned about. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Nanda. Next, we'll have a presentation by Dr. Aaron P. Davis. He would be speaking on the use of alternative coffee species in an era of accelerated climate change.
Was it too boring?
Dr. Davis is a senior research leader, Crops and Global Change, Royal Botanic Garden, Kew, UK. His research is focused on coffee as documented in a broad range of scientific publications, including those on the naming and classification of coffee species, molecular, DNA studies, conservation, climate change, agroecology, and sustainable development. He is a leading authority on coffee species and has traveled widely in Africa and Madagascar to study coffee plants in the wild and in cultivation. His ongoing work includes the use and development of wild and underutilized coffee species, particularly within the context of climate change adaptation and sensory diversification. Yeah, please.
Good morning, everybody. If I may ask a quick question, which is better, this or the microphone? Is there any preference? Is this fine? Fantastic. So good morning, everybody. My name is Dr. Aaron Davis, the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew. I've been working in coffee for about 20 years, and the last 10 years looking at climate risk and climate adaptation in coffee. And I really want to focus on adaptation to climate change this morning, and I want to talk about the use of alternative coffee species. And I think it's important that I start by actually defining what I mean when I say alternative coffee species. And what I'm talking about is anything that's not Arabica or Robusta. Now, this is the orthodoxy of our modern coffee cultivation landscape, but if we look back to the beginning of the 20th century, or perhaps the end of the 19th century, we see that the landscape has been quite dynamic over that time scale. So up until the end of the 19th century, it was dominated by Arabica. Then coffee leaf rust hit in Southeast Asia, and Liberica came into use. Liberica didn't work for a number of reasons, so Robusta was introduced, but I should point out that even back in the 17th and 18th century, Robusta was being traded. We just didn't know what it was. And as time has gone on through the 20th and 21st century, we've seen this almost parity with Arabica and Robusta. And you might hear that Liberica is 2% of global production, but that may have been the case in the 19th century, but isn't the case today. So during that period at the end of the 19th, early 20th century, we saw quite a dynamic coffee landscape. You can see this picture here. We have 3 species: failing Arabica due to coffee leaf rust, the rise and fall of Liberica, and then the development and the stellar rise of Robusta coffee. Now, those shifts, those changes were caused by serious disruption events. And that's mainly due to diseases, of course. But now we're facing another major disruption event, and that's climate change. And we've heard from our other speakers this morning exactly what that means. Now, I'm not going to go into the detail on the impacts and the risk of climate change. This is the study we published last year, only to say that there are nearly 200 studies now on the impact of climate change, and it's clear that it's not great news. There are some opportunities, of course, but I think it's very clear that the impacts are real, they're happening now, and they're projected to worsen. And we see the impact on the ground. My work is focused in Africa, and the reality is there. This is Ethiopia during a drought in 2015. This was actually this year. This is Robusta suffering from drought and having to be irrigated in Uganda. And I think it's clear that the major constraint is not heat. Yes, we're suffering from climate change, but that's driving precipitation changes. And drought is really our major issue. And that, of course, affects the supply chain, the value chain. And we've seen that in Brazil recently and Uganda and many other places. It's happening, it's real, those droughts are worsening. So we have those 200 studies on coffee and climate change focused on impact. That's fine, we needed to do that. But what I'm not seeing are solutions. How are we going to adapt to climate change? How do we act on climate change? And essentially, there are three main adaptation pathways. We can relocate. We can move coffee to more suitable areas or areas that are emerging in suitability. That's already happening. In Ethiopia, coffee's moving beyond the 2,000 meter elevation limit to 2,400, 2,600, and I heard last week 2,800. Now, relocation works in a climate situation. There are great benefits, but of course there are huge social and environmental implications of relocating. The second option, pathway, is to adapt the coffee growing environment. And we hear a lot about climate smart agriculture, et cetera, and there are, of course, like relocation, many benefits to adaptation. But in the work that we've done, what we see is that the costs of doing that are prohibitive for many, many farmers. But I would also argue, based on empirical research, that you're not going to hold back climate change unless you're irrigating. And that's, I think, it's a whole, another issue altogether. But irrigation will bring huge benefits, of course. The third option is to change the crop itself. And when I say change the crop, I'm not talking about shifting to another crop, I'm talking about changing the coffee crop. Now that could be varieties or cultivars, within species changes. It could be gene editing, genome editing approaches, breeding approaches, traditional crop development approaches. I'm just talking about changing the crop. What we're looking at is changing the species, not the variety, the species, as an adaptation pathway. And I think, just sort of sum that up, we're looking beyond Arabica and Robusta. So in a number of our research papers, and I put the papers up in case anybody wants any more information. Most of these publications are open access. But what we're saying is, the idea is not to replace Arabica and Robusta. It's to supplement and support Arabica and Robusta. And based on the research that we've done and the research of others, what we see is that Arabica and Robusta have very specific climate envelopes, and those climate envelopes are so restrictive that farmers will not be able to grow Arabica or Robusta. But let me put that another way. If you're growing Arabica and that's failing, where do you go? The notion that you can go to Robusta, I think, is ill-advised. If you're growing Robusta and you failed, where do you go next? So that's the reality of the situation. And it's happening now across the coffee landscape. So let's now look at the resources we have within coffee, within the diversity of the coffee genus. And I want to make a very clear distinction here between cultivars, varieties, and species, and they often get mixed up. So let's look at the tomato family as an example. These are all tomatoes, and that's analogous to Arabica cultivars varieties. So this would picture, if it was coffee, you'd see Catimor, Castillo, Sachimor, Bourbon, whatever. But what I'm talking about is species. So this is in the tomato genus. It's a Solanum, like tomato, but it's the potato. and an eggplant. When you start skipping across, moving out of species boundaries, the genomes are so different that you have many more possibilities. And in coffee, we're fortunate to have really quite a bewildering diversity. This is coffee from Madagascar. It has these bizarre wings on its fruits. It's adapted to water dispersal. This is another one about the size of a small plum. It has a seed like a human, or like a brain, like a vertebrate brain. So, although many of these coffee species look like Arabica and Robusta, there are some that are very, very different. So, as I say, we have 130 species. The centers of diversity are in Africa, tropical Africa, and Madagascar particularly. Madagascar alone has 65, probably more than that now, 70 species of the 130 species known to science. We're currently doing high throughput, high coverage sequence for all coffee species. And what we see there is that actually 130 species is an underestimate. So there are more species out there. So we have 130 species, maybe many more. Where do we start looking? So we are looking at candidates that have not been used for coffee production before, but for us, we need a shortcut. We don't have a lot of time. Let's look at those species that are in cultivation or were once in cultivation, say 100 years ago, those sort of lost, forgotten, underutilized species. So if you look at Arabica and Robusta, 99.9% of global production, and the rest, these other species which are underutilized crops, partially cultivated, or forgotten species, that's less than 0.1%. And I would actually say it's probably less than 0.01%. So there's a number of species here. I've got 9 species. In the workshop this afternoon, we're going to be trying species 3 to species 9. I think it's the first time it's ever been done in one place, and a few other species as well. So let's be practical. Let's look at some of the candidate species that might provide us with adaptation solutions for farmers. This is a study we published in 2019, and we were very keen on refinding Stenophylla in the wild and understanding its potential based on cupping reports from the early 20th century which said this coffee was better tasting than Arabica. That's enough to make anybody in coffee interested, I think. So Stenophylla coffee has a history. As I say, it was cultivated at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, at small scale in 3 countries in upper West Africa, was exported to Europe, and then died a death in the early 20th century because of low coffee prices. This is a picture taken in Trinidad. As you can see, this is next to Demerara sugar. It's a nice, small, compact bush. It's not a great picture. It's over 100 years old, but that's quite a productive bush. It's not Arabica or Robusta, but it produces a crop, a useful crop. These are the cherries, the black cherries. This is from Reunion Island from the Sirad germplasm collection. They're producing a washed coffee from this here. And this is a collaboration we had with Sirad in 2020. And what we did in this study was to push out an Arabica cupping sample to 30 judges. Blind tasting. And what they came back with was that actually in the blind cupping, 81% of the judges said the coffee was Arabica-like, which is quite interesting. When we first cupped it, before the bigger cupping, it tasted like a Rwandan Arabica, which is, for me, just incredible. But the other thing that was interesting, we also had some Arabicas in the blind tasting, and they got lower scores than the Stenophylla. So Stenophylla got 81%. Some of the non-specialty Arabicas scored 44% for an Arabica-like taste. What particularly interests me, and and what we need, we just, of course we're interested in sensory diversification, but we need climate resilience. And the amazing thing about Stenophylla is it occurs in a climate envelope that's much hotter and much more seasonal than either Arabica or Robusta. And if you look at these figures here, the mean annual temperature difference between Stenophylla and Arabica is over 6 degrees Celsius. And that starts to make sense when you're talking about long-term climate change. And that's because Stenophylla is from a low elevation, highly seasonal environment in West Africa, in temperatures that are much hotter than Arabica and a few degrees hotter than Robusta. So what I'm also interested in is not only doing the academic side of things, but seeing how this could work across the value chain. So we have a project whereby we're now gathering significant numbers of Stenophylla and putting them into farms and trial plots to see how they work, to see if it'll work before we scale it up as a niche crop. But I would say I think the utility of Stenophylla is in breeding, because the yield is not going to fill coffee containers. So that germplasm comes directly from the forest at the moment. There's nothing in cultivation producing fruit apart from those plots in Reunion. This is my colleague Daniel Samu, who's been working very hard in Sierra Leone to collect this germplasm and to get it into cultivation. So we have a value chain linked project from farmer to cup, where we're trying to see how this could perform, firstly of all in the specialty sector. Now I want to talk about one other candidate, which is Liberica coffee. And I think everybody here in the room has heard about Liberica coffee, whether you want to call it a variety, a botanical variety, or a species. That's up to you. I'm now tending to differentiate the two. This is a paper we published last year saying that, when I'm talking about this diversification is already happening, and this is what this paper is about for both Liberica and Excelsa. These are the unripe fruits of both species. You can see Liberica has a large fruit and a large seed, and Excelsa is much smaller. And here you can see the difference in the size of the green coffee. Excelsa's easier to deal with in processing-wise. You can see how the difference there between Liberica, the large Liberica beans, and the Excelsa, which is roughly the same size as Arabica. The fruit pulp is nice and thin, it's easy to pulp, it dries well, it processes just like a Robusta or Arabica. High yielding, nice compact inflorescences, lots of fruit per tree. And so we're already working with farmers, and I think it's really important to point out this isn't something we're telling farmers to do, they're already doing it. So they're shifting from Robusta to Excelsa by themselves. We're just trying to see what that means from many different perspectives linked to the value chain. So we're already exporting a few metric tons, but the potential in India are also growing Excelsa, in South Sudan and Uganda is, already we're looking at perhaps 1,000 metric tons within the next 5 years. And the yields are good. The yields are comparable to Arabica Robusta, depending on the climate. There's a sack of cherry here, that sack 60 to 70 kilograms, that's one tree. And we have a mother tree that produces 300 kilograms of cherry. But most importantly, and the difference between Excelsa and Liberica is the outturn is much more satisfactory at around 7-to-1 for Excelsa. And you'd have like 6-to-1 for Arabica or 5-to-1 for Robusta. And yeah, workable yields even at low planting densities. So we're following up what's happening on the farms with the value chain work, but also we're trying to really empirically understand the benefit, the climate resilience benefits of Excelsa coffee. And if you remember the first picture I showed you of Robusta being irrigated this year, this is the same period, different species, same locality. So Excelsa, Robusta was wilting and dying, Excelsa was fine. And I must say a considerable credit to colleagues in Uganda who are doing these field trials. They're making a fantastic job of it. My time's up, so I just want to quickly cover what we need to do perhaps mid-century, towards the end of the century, and I want to talk about Ibu coffee, Zanzibar coffee, and Racemosa coffee, and it's not so much their value as a crop, which of course they have, but what they can tell us about coffee itself and what we need to do in terms of breeding, genome editing, to produce really climate-resilient coffees. This is Carimbas Island in the Carimbas Archipelago, arrived on a small pirogue. It's 43 degrees Celsius. This is, of course, at sea level. There's the sea. Turn around on the beach, and they're drying Zanzibar coffee, Ibu coffee. It withstands a 5-month drought period, very high temperatures, a very low rainfall requirement. And Racemosa coffee, its sister species, is rather similar, and there'll be a talk tomorrow by Charles Dennison on Racemosa coffee. The problem with this coffee is the yield and the bean size. And if I had more time, I would explain that, in terms of our modern era of genome editing, it's easier to change those characters than it is to make something like Arabica or Robusta more climate resilient. And if we look, this is where Robusta and Arabica come from. This is where Racemosa and Ibu coffee come from. Much warmer than Arabica, much drier than Robusta. And this is where we may need to be towards the end of the century, mid-century. Summing up then, I think it's important to realize that Arabica and Robusta have limitations. You can't push those species into another climatic zone without either interbreeding or some very, very severe genome editing. It's just not possible. These species have their limits, and you can't easily push them beyond that unless you do something really profound. So there's been articles like this in some of the main media channels. We must embrace new and resilient beans. It's already happening, and it's also happening here in India. So some great potential, I think, within the diversity of coffee species, and we've heard about the key biodiversity issues and deforestation. At the same time as we're realizing the huge potential in these coffee species, we're now able to say that 60% of those coffee species are threatened with extinction. And something like Stenophylla, if we'd waited 10 years, we're assuming that actually it wouldn't have been there if we'd been doing it 10 years later. Deforestation is so rampant in many key tropical countries. And I'll end there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. In the interest of time, I will not speak much. A quick summary. as a marginal stakeholder in the coffee sector, I felt, it's a complete delivery of, a delivery of complete package on sustainable coffee. Almost every aspect, of the value chain, farm, business, consumption, you heard, all kinds of things, in terms of solutions to make coffee sustainable in the long run, in terms of minimizing the climate change impact, adopting various innovative solutions, need for R&D investment, diversification of the crop as well as the species, certification of coffee. At least I believe that all of these things, will make, sustainable coffee available for all the consumers like us. Now we have in approximately 25 minutes, and we have a structured panel discussion with two panelists, as well as I hope we'll get opportunity to take few questions from the audience. Now I would like to request Mr. S. Sudhindra, is the Managing Director, NKG India Coffee Private Limited, to make his remarks. You can also briefly introduce yourself. I don't have your profile. You want to go there or, yeah, or you can do it from here. Yeah. Yeah. See, given the time limit, I think you can limit yourself to 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Or say something.
Good morning. Hope you had a nice introduction on sustainability, climate change from the experts on the dais. Okay, from the business, first I'll just have a small introduction. My name is Sudhindra. I'm the Managing Director of NKG India, and I'm in the coffee field for last 20 years. And we have been working on this sustainability as a linkage between the growers and the final roasters for more than last 16 to 17 years. So the introduction of these code certifications is all part of the business where we have taken a lead role in introducing in the country. And we also given as market linkage to most of these initiatives that has been taken. So one side, these codes are coming, another side there has to be linkage. So we act as a link between the growers and the final roasters with these requirements which is coming up. And coming back on the topic on climate change and sustainability. So I'll just limit myself to remarks on the Indian coffee. So as far as Indian coffee is concerned, it is sustainability grown and it is grown in a forest. So whatever the risk we have been talking about in these areas is non-existing in India. And when we talk about regenerative agriculture practices, these are all already imbibed by the planting community here. And some of the initiatives by the government in terms of the water and the water disposals are excellently implemented in India. And I think India, as far as India is concerned, we are far ahead in these type of the topics. I think we have done an excellent job. Planters have done a lot of job on this. And I think Coffee Board has also done a lot of research on new varieties and to address the present issues. And I think we are proud that as the Indian coffee industry, we have done very well in addressing the sustainability issues. And I think coffee is grown in shade in India. So I think probably all over the place we indulge in enchanting shades of the Indian coffee. So the coffee is grown in India in the shades, and this is one of the only countries where the coffee is grown with the shades. And I think the coffees from India, we always been promoting that it is a sustainable coffee in the long run. And with this remark, I leave the dais. Thanks for the presentation. And I think one issue which really want to be addressed is instead of the new varieties. So more research has to be because all these planting takes 6 to 7 years to yield. Farmers would have spent a lot of money in planting it. So to address any research, if it happens on addressing the current pests or the diseases issues, that will be the great thing. So that will be in the short term, will help the growers in the whole thing. And as a value chain, we are here to support the sustainability initiatives. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now I request Professor Sunil Nautiyal, for quick remarks of 5 minutes. Then I think we can go back to some specific questions. Huh? Yeah. You can. Yeah, thank you.
For 5 minutes, sir? 5, okay. Good morning, and very outset, I would like to thank International Coffee Organization and Coffee Board India for giving me this opportunity. My name is Sunil Nautiyal, and I come from Institute for Social and Economic Change, Bangalore. And this is my parent institute, and now I moved to Himalaya. I'm heading an institution under Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, named G.B. Pant National Institute of Himalayan Environment. And attending this conference has given me lots of hope that what could be done as far as injection and introduction of coffee with relate to Himalayan landscape is concerned. Dr. Rana, your lecture was really made me to think that when you had said that now under changing climatic conditions, the traditional areas under coffee cultivation may go down, and there is an emergence of new areas where we need to look at how to explore the opportunities to introduce coffee into such areas. So India has all privileges. We have very diversified landscapes. Definitely Himalaya could be one of, but not in higher Himalaya, but foothills of the Himalaya and northeastern Himalayan region could provide a kind of environment and landscape for coffee introduction. Dr. Salvador, you have mentioned that there is a gap worth of $452 million as far as coffee sustainability in coffee is concerned, coffee cultivation is concerned. But here in India, we have many, very different issues, many, challenging issues. Our farmers in India are facing acute problem due to the damage incurred by wild animals. And unfortunately, we don't have sufficient funding to support farmers and to replenish the loss which is incurred due to increased frequency of wildlife attack on the coffee farming. For example, I would like to give you an example that in Ponampet Taluk of our state, Karnataka, very small taluk, number of incidences were reported 1,760, roughly in last 5 years. And compensation was given approximately 11.5 million rupees. So it's coming 5,500 rupees per case. If you divide by 5 years, it's only 1,000 rupees. So farmers, and majority of the farmers which are victim are our small landholders. So here, I think our stakeholders and our government and other CSR institutions should also come forward to look into this issue so that our farmers, are given, their concerns are addressed, and the loss is minimized while providing additional support to them. Madhuri Nanda, Dr. Madhuri Nanda, your presentation, yes, regenerative agriculture in coffee, and very interestingly, voluntarily sustainability standard and environmental sustainability of coffee farm to landscape level. I think this is very much important to be addressed. And lecture by Dr. Davis, I think this is really very important. What I feel also, we are working in now alpine ecosystems. There are many, I'm not talking about coffee here, but what recently I have read a paper in biological conservation that alpine species have adjusted to change climate, implying older seeds may not be, may be unsuitable for future use. Seed banks should therefore increase, seed banks therefore should increase the collection of frequency of collection from the parent seeds. So this is the case of coffee also. If we rely on the traditional and old varieties, then we will not be able to provide proper incentives to the farmers. So I think this is very interesting that alternative coffee species in the areas of accelerating climate change, this is very much important. And Sudhindraji, your points with regard to sustainability is well concerned. So what I would like to highlight is that I have few research questions here to be discussed. One thing is that I am very much for having collaboration, intense collaboration with Coffee Board India. Director Senthil Kumar Saab is here. Dr. Saab, our institute also provides funding to conduct the research. And now if we are here to explore new area for coffee cultivation in our country and to reduce the pressure on one landscape, for example, Western Ghats in Kodagu, high pressure is going there on the landscape level. So how to reduce and delineate the pressure to other areas which have the potential to support coffee farming. So here we can definitely do the research together, and Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change through National Mission on Himalayan Studies provides such funding. So I welcome you to develop proposal with us, and we can definitely work on this. And 3-4 questions I would like to highlight here is that one is in India, the issues are quite diversified. Even our land management system are quite diversified. As far as coffee cultivation is concerned, we have unredeemed land. The rights to prune the trees lies with the forest department. We have redeemed land where farmers have the right to do pruning and lopping of the said trees. And we have cultural landscapes where farmers are cultivating coffee following our own traditional norms, rituals, and so on and so forth. So are these three governance systems revisiting the rules under contemporary changes? I think this has to be also properly addressed. And another aspect is that factors with regard to national and international level affecting the production of coffee by small farmers. This is not much studied, but this really need to be addressed. What are the ecosystem services augmentation and these services reduction needed for sustainable landscape? I think these services are emerging very fast. I tell you one thing, as far as forest fire is concerned, this service has to be reduced. Coffee could do something very substantially to reduce the forest fire. I think I could see the opportunity if we go for pine coffee-based agroforestry system in Shivalik Hills of Central Himalaya. I think forest fire could be definitely reduced. Well, I can do one thing is that, Dr. Senthil Kumar Sahab, we can have a meeting with the Honorable Forest Minister of Uttarakhand to initiate this discussion and to take this discussion forward for real executions in the foothills of the Himalaya. Another aspect, one more important thing is that we are just losing our traditional ecological knowledge, and this has to be properly addressed. So question is, can the traditional knowledge system be integrated or coexist with the modern knowledge to develop shared knowledge base for efficient production system? I think many point of time, and in case of unprecedented changes taking place in the environment and socio-ecological system, we have empirically tested that traditional ecological knowledge has supported to adapt and to mitigate the threats. I think this needs to be properly addressed. And last point, sir, how the farmers can take real-time decision holistically in every aspect of coffee production, processing, and marketing with minimum ecological impacts. This has to be properly addressed. There are some other questions also, but I feel that during the course of our discussion with the audience sitting here, we can address some of them. Thank you so very much for this opportunity, and once again, thank you very much for inviting me here.
Thank you. I think Professor Sunil raised some quite important questions. Anyone in the panel would like to respond? Any quick response? Any one of you?
The floor to the
No, that is
audience
next, I
also
think.
to-
Yeah. There's still some more time. Anyone? If no, any specific questions to the panel you want to have, either Mr. Sudhindra, the speakers, any specific questions? Now, before going into the audience, if you have anything to any particular, you can use the mic.
Hello. So what as disaster risk reduction and coffee farming. So how to deal with the climate-related uncertainties to minimize the disaster risk? Kodagu and our Western Ghat region had seen very unprecedented impact due to changing climatic conditions. And unfortunately, we are not really ready to cope because they are so sudden and so unprecedented. So how to overcome from such kind of, can science help us in reducing such kind of risk in our pristine ecosystems of Western Ghats?
No? Anyone? No. Do you have any specific questions? Or we can go to the audience. We have 10 minutes. Anyone from audience? Any specific questions to the speakers? I think someone, yeah.
As a small farmer, in India, we cultivate coffee in shade. Our economical stability is very in a difficult situation now. Whenever the farmer is in difficult, the first decision he takes up is to cut down timber. It will be a great loss for the nature. What will be the, is there any rainforest incentives for the farmers from the region of Coorg, Chikmagalur and Hassan? We are helping the nature so much that we give a lot for the environment. From the last 3 years, we are facing heavy rains, and our economic stability has gone down. In coffee farm has gone down.
Hi. So the Rainforest Alliance certification program really talks about biodiversity, and agroforestry is one of the elements. You know, as you know, traditionally coffee farming in Karnataka is already in a shade grown with a high agroforestry. Conventionally, it has been growing like that. We completely understand the reason why you're saying because of the economic situations, the harvesting of timber might happen. But as part of the standard, we look at how can you have sustainable harvesting to make sure that the biodiversity in the region continues to stay while, for example, planting, so different kind of agroforestry designs are possible within the coffee farms. For example, planting of fruit trees so that you can, to manage the economies of scale. How can you have fruit which can be harvested and add to the income so that there is a better income diversification without impacting the environment in a bigger way. I think we can have a more detailed one-to-one discussion. If you can have some time, please feel free to drop into our booth at the conference exhibition area, and we can have more detailed discussions there. Thank you.
Just to complement that, I think I'm not familiar with Indian policy. However, I've seen in other countries where governments and even private sector have implemented what's called payment for ecosystem services. So providing a value for biodiversity or for protection. And so in addition to on-farm options about how do you diversify income, I also think that there's a lot of opportunities for exploring more holistically payment for ecosystem services.
Thank you so much for this question, and I would like to know one thing from you before I ask, but this is just for my knowledge development, not to ask you the question. Coffee is a very sensitive crop and getting attacked by 900 kind of pests. One among them is white stem borer in Karnataka, in our state. I would like to know from you that when as shade tree, we cultivate under shades. So what kind of, have you introduced exotic species? Are you still managing to cultivate coffee under native tree species? So based on your experience in the field, have you noticed the pest attack under native tree species or exotic tree species? Because this kind of information is very, very much required. Not only shade, but other attacks are there on coffee. Shade is one among them. If not properly done, then it's impact the production. But another pest can also attack if there is no proper management of the canopy. So I think this also need to be investigated properly, in my opinion.
Yeah, next question.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Kushalappa, former Dean of the Forestry College, but currently leading the Biotaku Farmers Producer Company. Question for Madhuri and also Conservation International. We've been certified as a group, but what we're seeing is into payments for the farmers. We are certified, we are investing a cost on certification, but ultimately what we get is not probably worth the effort. That's what the farmers' perceptions are. What do you see in future, the growing demand for these certified coffees, both within and outside the country? And ma'am, you're talking of the PES system. Probably Costa Rica and few other countries have gone into the PES payments, but in India, per se, as of now, we've not seen much of traction happening in the PES sector also. Please help us to, there could be a rainforest itself could help in marketing of the coffee. Certification is one part, but the next level is trying the groups to market the coffee as certified rainforest coffee.
Thank you, Dr. Kushalappa, for the question. I think it's important to understand that as a certification program, we provide certain criteria which need to be met to be able to qualify yourself as a sustainable producer. We do understand, and I also briefly mentioned about it in my presentation, that there is a challenge for the producers also because of the gap of 40% of the certified coffee which is currently being sold as conventional, because of the lack of market. But I think as an organization, it's very difficult for us to work alone on the markets. We do have a very strong, a bigger network where we work with the supply chain actors as well. And that provides us a better leverage to work with them and bring them to source sustainable products, sustainable coffee, tea, and other commodities. What I would think, unless different stakeholders, once again, as my concluding point was, we need to work jointly and together on this. It would not be possible for one organization alone to find the solution, whether it is bringing consumer awareness, whether it is trying to understand how can you bring the brand awareness, how can the companies and the Rainforest Alliance, for example, we are trying to also work with some of the cafes and joints to see how we can bring the story, the sustainability story to the producers, to the consumers who are buying and having that cup of coffee in a cafe, so that they can value and they can understand that their contribution is going back to the producer. So it's entirely about the traceability which the standard is able to provide. But I think it's again important for us to work together to see how we can create a better market. That market, I understand and we believe will grow in future. It's in the process, but again, a joint effort from others would also be needed.
Do you have any other?
Sir, my question is to Arun Davis, sir. Sir, you have represented different species of coffee along with Arabica and Robusta, other racemata species. So in India, in Andhra Pradesh, we are facing problem with coffee white stem borer, especially in Arabica. So what is the pest status in those species? What are the tolerance levels? Can we use those species in our states in Andhra Pradesh?
So we're early days with pest and diseases, but we have done pest and disease surveys in wild populations and in cultivations in Africa for Excelsa and Liberica. And what we're seeing is tolerance to some stem borers. Of course, the stem and twig borers we have in Africa are not the same as in India. But for example, in Robusta, it's not necessarily the drought that's killing Robusta. It's everything that comes with, associated with plant stress. So the main issue is actually twig borer, not climate meteorological parameters per se, it's twig borer. But we are seeing on the same farms much, much higher tolerance in Excelsa and Liberica. But it's a piece of the jigsaw that really it needs to be there, and we're very aware of that. Is, you know, climate change and abiotic stress incurs implications for pests and diseases, mostly negative, but sometimes positive. So, but it is worth experimenting with some different species, I would say.
I think maybe last question. Yeah.
Sir, I am UN Burma. I am advisor to Odisha Coffee Growers Association. Actually, our coffee plantations in the Odisha is a state in the Indian subcontinent. It is located in the eastern part of the country. Actually, there was no coffee cultivation in the British rule during the colonial period. But coffee cultivation started mainly after colonial period. In the year around 1952 started by a king of Odisha. So now what is we are facing, Government of India is declaring our coverage of forest is around 20%. But what we have observed from the satellite photographs, it is hardly 12% is covered if you are taking the photograph in the summer months. So where there is coffee cultivation, where there is green, evergreen shade trees like silver oak and other trees available, it is indicating like on forest. So if the international body as well as the Government of India, our research, director research and other people can take initiative to protect the environment of the Eastern Ghats, which is a bigger landscape of India in comparison to Western Ghats. Western Ghat is a compact area and Eastern Ghat is a scattering area, which is guarding all the clouds coming from the Bay of Bengal, and it is giving support for the raining in the eastern zone of India, central zone and northern zone. It is giving distribution of rain for which India is one monsoon-fed country and giving feeding to the 140 crore people of our country. But what we are observing, the forest department, they are protecting the forest, but they are not able to protect properly. If more coffee cultivation can be done in the Eastern Ghats, the Indian food security can be enhanced, and this beverage crop, the popular beverage crop of the world, can be available easily, and we can provide sustainable employment to our tribal population. Those are living around 60% in the mountainous areas. So Eastern Ghat is covering not only Odisha, but covering Tamil Nadu, a part of Karnataka, and Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Odisha, and part of West Bengal. So this is my question to Dr. Salvador Euricia Laurel, as well as to our Madam Raina Lang, Conservation International, to give their opinion. Thanks.
Shall I conclude or?
Last one question,
sir. Yeah, I think quick response from you. Yes.
Looks like he's in a hurry.
You have any inputs to give, or you can have one-to-one discussion afterwards? Yeah. What about you? Do you have any comments to make?
Thanks for your very valid point that there's also a need to be focusing on the eastern areas of India as well. I would encourage you, there's a lot of great organizations that work on conservation and production here in India. Rainforest Alliance, of course. There's also IDH that is looking at kind of landscapes and sustainable production. And I'd encourage you to seek out some partners that are here to help you think about what you can do in the Eastern Ghats.
And I think just to add to what Lina just mentioned, the landscape level intervention that I briefly mentioned about, this project that we have from Global Environment Facility, it's actually looking at Eastern and Western Ghats both. So we are looking at some of the districts in Andhra Pradesh as well, and we are looking at the entire, it's commodity neutral. So we are looking at coffee, cashew, whatever is being grown in that region, and trying to see how we can promote sustainable agriculture in line of maintaining biodiversity and reducing land degradation in those areas. So more and more projects and investments are coming in that way as well.
Yeah, because of lack of time, I think let us conclude this Q&A session. I think you will have opportunity to discuss at a later. Already we have overshot by 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. Before your final comment, sir,
And I don't have any. I think it was a very, very well diversified session, covering all the aspects. And I believe that, in the future we'll have a brand called Sustainable Coffee. Thank you.
So kindly stay back, sir. I would request Dr. Sendil Kumar, the Director of Research of Coffee Board, to kindly give a mementos to all the esteemed panelists. I would request Professor P. Balachandra to kindly accept the felicitation and the memento first. Kindly come to the front, sir. So that Ladies and gentlemen, Professor P. Balachandra steering this particular session. Thank you, sir. I would now request Ms. Raina Lang to kindly come over and accept the felicitations. Thank you, ma'am. And now I would request Mr. Salvador Urrutia Lausil to kindly come over. Thank you very much, Mr. Salvador, for your presentation. Thank you. I would now request Dr. Madhuri Nanda to kindly come over. Director, South Asia Rainforest Alliance. Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Madhuri. I would now request Dr. Aaron P. Davis, Senior Research Leader, Crops and Global Change, Royal Botanic Gardens, UK. Thanks, Dr. Aaron P. Davis. And now I would request Mr. S. Sudhindra, Managing Director of NKG India Coffee. Thank you, Shri Sudhindra. Yeah. I would now request Professor Sunil Nautiyal, Director, G.B. Pant National Institute of Himalayan Environment, NIHE, India. Thank you very much. I would now request Dr. Sendil Kumar and the panelists to kindly come forward for a group photograph. So as the group photograph is being taken, please note the next session will start in another 15 minutes time. And importantly, next session also, we have Professor Fabio who's going to talk in Portuguese. So if some of you want any headsets to be taken, next 15 minutes time is there. Please go back, collect your headsets, because and one more speaker also may speak in a language other than English, so it will be helpful. In addition to Mr. Fabio, if anybody else speaks in a language other than English, so please collect your headsets, but do not forget to return it after the session is over. So see you all in the next 15 minutes. Thank you very much. Have a great time.